Welcome to everybody. We are very excited about the participation that we have today. We have 58 attendees registered for this session, and that is the largest that we've ever had. And we were just kind of joking before we got started that Dr. Scott is an excellent draw. So we are privileged to have Dr. Aaron Scott with us today. He's no stranger to those of us that have been involved with animal ID and information systems and NIAA throughout the years, and it has always been very generous in sharing with us USDA's perspectives and direction and where they're going. So Aaron, we're thankful that you could be with us today, and thank you for accommodating us. I know we had a little bit of back and forth about the date, but with that and no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, sir, and hello to everyone. I see lots of friends out there, so wish we could all be meeting in person, and maybe someday that will be the case. Just starting to share my screen. It's on a different monitor here, so I apologize if I'm looking away from you all and you're seeing the back of my head, but that's so I can see my monitors. Let me get started here. I think this has already gotten to the second slide. So on traceability, I have a number of things to talk about. Some of them are updates. I tried not to talk about too many things that we've talked about in the recent past, but quite a few things going on for us. A lot of things happening in the traceability world, not the least of which is a new rule. I put this slide up looking back through some documents. When I before I was director here, I was director in the National Surveillance Unit, and at that time, I remember the ADT guys would come around to my office, and they closed the door, and then they'd rant and rant and rant about traceability, and I would very kindly listen, and behind my sober poker face, I would chuckle and think, boy, I'm glad that I wasn't in the traceability seat. And then I got this assignment coming a little bit later on. So some really great rewards with traceability and some tough hauls too. But looking back, we've come a long ways. We back in 2010, traceability was something that if you wanted to walk into the local bar and talk about it, it was almost a battle cry in some parts of the country. Today, many of our larger livestock organizations are very supportive and looking toward the future of where we might go and where our industry may need to be. We have since 2013, as you know, our program, the traceability program, is a performance-based program, and on that, the metric that we've used in the past is a combination of 3 traces, and the baseline of that before the 2013 rule was 490 hours. That's more than a day. That's pretty long. It's long enough that for many diseases, it would probably not be possible to contain and control those diseases. Since then, each year has improved, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in just a minute. But those in this last year, that combination of 3 traces, I think almost all of our states were able to do in less than 1.5 hours combined. That's less than half an hour for each one of them. And a lot of the folks have been doing those in literally minutes. And then we, as you know, and we'll talk about here shortly, have a proposed rule on the books to make some changes to Part 86, the most significant of which is to require official ID to be readable both visually as well as electronically. Let's see, next slide here, come on. So I want to talk just a little bit. We've also got some discussions going on with swine traceability. And in fact, I and Dr. Healy and Dr. Agenor at the swine staff are meeting with the swine industry next week to provide whatever information they may desire from us. Cattle versus swine traceability are pretty different. I guess no pun intended. Different animals. They're two very different industries in structure. They're each have different challenges, different production challenges, and also some different drivers. Swine industry is very heavily business oriented. Cattle industry is also has a kind of this Western heritage driver in it too. Some different cultures of folks that are involved, and the whole sum total of the industry is different organization. So very different. And today I'm going to talk mostly about the cattle traceability, because that is what's on the table right now as far as the rule that's coming. So if you think about what the driver is for both of our industries, I was trying to make a list. I was trying to be real analytic and academic and make this long list of what was important, and what it came down to was this number one with 10 zeros after it. That's approximately the amount of money that each of these industries receives from exports, a little bit more and a little bit less on them, but that's a pretty hefty chunk of money. And if you recall back in 2003, when we had the BSE cow, it shot our export markets down just almost literally overnight. And BSE is something that wasn't around when I first graduated from veterinary school, and is essentially a no risk today. But there's a whole long list of other diseases that could very easily eliminate our export markets. And of course, those we always fall back to foot and mouth disease, but there's another long list. And with the swine folks right now, I think most of us that are involved in any way in the swine industry are terrified of African swine fever that's spread across the world in the recent few years. So we've got some pretty big stakes. We've got quite a chunk of money. I heard Kathy Simmons yesterday talking, and she commented that the export markets for beef were worth $465 a head. I could remember not that many years ago, the $465 would buy you a pretty hefty calf. So big progress there, and probably more coming. I put this slide up. Wanted to talk just a little bit about our traceability program, and this is a much neater version of what's on my desktop right now. So these are all the things that are involved in our traceability program. And when I talk about this is our federal animal disease traceability. This isn't all the things that are on industry and states' plates. For us, in the traceability program, we oversee several regulations, not just Part 86, but we touch upon a number of other ones. We've been working on the language and accompanying documents with the new rule. We have had lawsuit challenges and FOIA requests for information. When we had the first lawsuit that came about, we, in preparation for the attorneys and the case and appeal, we did searches and found 94,000 emails and documents that were related to traceability. And a lot of those were peripheral and not responsive to the lawsuit. But a big challenge, if you could imagine going through 94,000 documents. And first disclaimer is we didn't have 94 pieces of paper in front of us. We used some electronic screening tools and worked through it, but still some pretty major efforts on doing that. We have our trace exercises that we implement each year to partly for our states to test how well they can do traceability, and partly to make sure that all of our states folks are very well trained and understand where data are and how to best do the traces. There are compliance issues. I saw Chelsea on there. We have lots of issues with livestock markets, of approving the markets and working with them. The budget, I put in a kind of a yellow color there because the budget is a big issue for us. Our traceability budget is not a congressional line. It's money that our folks in APHIS find each year. We have a set internal line to pay for people's salaries and our basic operating costs. But the additional funding that we have provided for tags, for RFID readers, and some of the things we've done is always kind of a scramble every year to find out where there's some spare money. Probably not the most popular person within our agency because a lot of that money comes to provide those tags. And it's always a challenge because our budgets come about and frequently we don't even have a budget until somewhere mid-year. In fact, this year we're still on a continuing resolution until the end of next week. On that funding, we provide funding for states to do their basic programs and operations. We have contracts with some of the folks on the call here and some of our partners to provide tags. We had a little bit of money from the Farm Bill that is under consideration for enhancing some electronic data capture at Santa Teresa and maybe some other ports. The Farm Bill also had some funding for tribes for traceability and some other Farm Bill projects that were in there as well. Our goals and plans are pretty straightforward, much more difficult in the implementation, but a little more straightforward in the strategy. If you get RFID tags in ears and you get the infrastructure to read the tags and you get the data systems that would use those tag numbers in, whether it be on the private industry side to manage business operations or on the traceability side to find out where infected animals or exposed animals may have been, is a major part. And then the other thing is the data sharing with the people, the officials and the veterinarians and the folks that would actually do traces and contain some of these emergency response outbreaks. I put at the bottom a conservative culture, thinking back through all of the years since I was very, very young. We're all, I think I probably speak for most all of us, we're a pretty conservative culture. We aren't real big on changing things unless we really are sure that those changes are going to be worthwhile. And that's good. That's what makes us, our industry and agriculture, run why we're able to have been feeding our people from when we had clans all the way to feeding the world today. Downside of it is that those changes are take a lot of convincing to do something different than what we are currently doing. Other things that are on our plate: outreach, educate, and communicate with our people, support our partners, and then can't forget our accredited veterinarians who are out there on the front line of not just traceability, but all of our disease programs. I added a couple of little boxes there on feeder cattle and intrastate traceability. Not that those are on the table right now, but those were two things that the Office of Inspector General came back to us this last year commenting that those were things that we had not adequately assessed the risk to our industry for. So those in future will, within the next year or so, will probably require some risk assessment to look at what kind of risks we may face with those. So this is the rule. So our ADT rule, I put a timeline here. I was assigned this director seat in late 2016 and sometime in 2017 is when it was. In 2016, the ADT staff did an assessment of the program And one of the things that they saw in there was that our managing data with visual tags and the record keeping that we had was a little cumbersome. We weren't able to do things, or states weren't able to do things as quickly and efficiently as they might. We traveled around the country in 2017, including with NIAA, to get input from people. And we heard a lot. We heard both people who were adamant that they were very concerned that the industry was at risk. We heard other people that were very much opposed to doing anything different as far as traceability. And in the following 2 years, we'd had, I didn't even try to quantify them because I don't know how many meetings and discussions and phone calls and questions that we answered during those years. In 2019, we APHIS had made the policy decision to require official ID to all be electronically readable as well as visually. We thought that that was a reasonable policy change because it's codified in Part 86 that that's under the administrator's authority. We pulled that back, realizing with some input from a number of different directions that that policy change was a pretty major impact. And so we put out a Federal Register notice of intent in 2020, and we got a little less than 1,000 comments back from people representing, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people, because many of those were letters from larger organizations. So we pulled that one back again, and since then I've been working on the proposed rule. That rule has gone through a number of clearance hoops. The rule itself is accompanied by a revised technical document and a regulatory impact assessment that goes with it. Those have gone through clearance of a number of parts of USDA and different parts from my desk all the way to the secretary's desk, and then outside of USDA to OMB for clearance. We've received notice that OMB is ready to clear that, and so we are anticipating that proposed rule to be published sometime in the coming weeks. We don't know a date on that. We don't know if it'll be before the holidays or after, or just how soon that will be, but we are anticipating it coming pretty soon. The timeline on that is that once the proposed rule is published, there will be a public comment period for 60 days. And those comments, then we will review those, tabulate those. And at the end of that time, after consideration of that public comment period on the rule, then a decision will be made to implement it or not to. And if implemented, then the final rule will be published, and implementation of the content of the rule would take place 6 months later. So I want to talk about just a few odds and ends that seem like they get confused by people. So official identification is defined in 9 CFR Part 86. So there's 2 definitions that apply. The first one is an official ear tag. An official ear tag is an identification tag approved by APHIS. That approval under the APHIS administrator's authority comes down through to us here in veterinary services. The second one is an official identification device or method. So that's a means approved by the administrator of applying official ID number to an animal. So things like brands and tattoos and some other means of identification are not official ID, but they're considered in lieu of official if they are accepted by a sending and receiving state. So basically, that state authority, if 2 states agree on how they can manage their traceability, then these alternative methods are can be used as official identification methods, but they're not official identification ear tags. They're not the same thing. I want to talk, I think the next 2 or 3 slides are about the metal noose tags. The metal noose tags, first of all, for the supplies, they're available right now in the warehouse for all the states. We are, the number available is not to exceed the average that we had before we started talking about RFID. So that number for any states that might, I think in 2019, we had a few states that decided they were going to stockpile thousands and thousands of them, and that's not the case. The number that's available to the states is same as what they had previously, but not in excess numbers to what there were then. And then the third bullet is that if you add up the number of metal noose tags and the number of RFID tags, that number is greater than we had provided as free tags in any year in the past. So that's so they're available. I think I'll talk a little bit about future in a minute, so I'll skip off on that. So the metal noose tags, we call them noose tags, but the noose tag, noose is a numbering system. It's not a tag. And the noose numbering system is codified in a CFR as a numbering system, but the CFR does not codify or talk about what we call noose tags. So that's sometimes a little bit confusing for folks when they're talking about the tags. And we all slip into it. We talk about noose tags and we all know what each other's talking about. But technically, noose is a number system, not a tag. And then the bottom picture there is the format of those tags of that numbering system. So the first 2 digits are either a state number code or a state postal code, followed by 3 alpha characters and then 4 numeric characters. And this is the noose numbering system for cattle and bison. I wanted to talk a little bit about tag standards. All of our APHIS approved RFID tags must be readable with normal vision at arm's length. That's written in the tag standards. It's something that we, among many other things, but we evaluate on those tags. And if they are not readable with 20/20 vision at 30 inches away, then they don't get an approval. They don't pass. The metal tags don't have any readability standards at all. So if you've been out in the field in the north in January, you probably kind of cringe at that. But if you look at these pictures, I don't think they're to scale, but they're not too far off of scale. And the RFID tags have some readability standards. I think those have to be like about a 1/2 centimeter, 1/4 inch, something like that in size, and readable. The noose tags there, that's a brucellosis tag. And I can, on my screen, if I look closely, I can read the numbers, but they're not always very easy to read, and especially if they have worn off after a few years in an ear. Wanted to mention a little bit about non-US born cattle. So 840 tags are only allowed to be put in US born cattle. They're not allowed to be put in cattle that are born in another country. Noose tags are allowed to be put in foreign born animals. And so today, if you have Mexican or Canadian imports that for some reason lose their official ID tag, it is allowable under Part 86 to replace that with a noose tag. But the question on the table is, well, what if we don't approve noose tags as official ID anymore? What if we only allow RFID tags? And we've been asked, we've had either 1 or 2 USHA resolutions to find a solution to that. Where we are going with that is to prepare a solicitation for something like this 840 tag, a tag that's approved as an official ADT tag, that will have a different manufacturer number and some unique coloration and printing on it. We are working on that solicitation now, and that's not out forward, but that will provide the tags for those cattle that are not born in the United States, but will provide them with an RFID readable tag for those animals. I want to talk, this is another one that people seem to be confused on sometimes. This is about the jurisdiction. So our jurisdiction in APHIS is controlling, is about movements across state lines. So our jurisdiction comes into place when certain disease program. The jurisdiction within those boundaries goes back to the state and or tribal partners, and of course you got to expand that, I guess, a little bit further. If it's within your own herd, then it's your private veterinarian who is the authoritative figure on watching those. So this gets pretty far-reaching because there's a lot of questions sometimes on how the jurisdiction works and how we work together as partners. So when we start talking about partners, the greater we, all of us on the call, then we need to keep in mind where that jurisdiction lies and who's responsible for what parts of it. Compliance. I think the only thing I wanted to talk about there is that the compliance part gets really, really complicated, and not just for the average person out there, but for those of us that are in the veterinary services strategy and policy business unit. If I guess I shouldn't speak for everybody, but for me, there's not too many things that I hate worse than sitting down and reading the CFR. And with the CFR, there's a lot of things where it's not just one part, where there are different parts that apply to each other. It's pretty painful. It would be wonderful if the CFR was had all been written at one time and everything was coordinated and made sense, but it isn't. And so interpreting some of these rules becomes not the easy cut and dried parts, but some nuances in the rules become a little difficult to interpret. The trace performance exercise, this shows that baseline prior to 2013. And these are 3 traces. The trace time for where an animal was identified, what state it was identified in, and where it was imported from, what location. Those 3 traces on the average at that time were 490 hours. 490 hours is pretty slow. By year 6, which was I think 2019 about, or 2020, that had dropped down to 11.5 hours. And then in the 7th and 8th year, which was the year before last and last year, our folks, and I have a couple of staff officers on the call here right now, did some pretty amazing things. And so they sat down and they said, well, let's talk with our state partners. Let's give them a heads up and say, when can you do a trace? And treat it like it was a real emergency, treat it like it was a national emergency. And so they did that, and not only improved the time, but also with that heads up, reduced these times, as you can see here, to a fraction of an hour for each one of those. And this year, at least I haven't seen the data yet, but this year is even better yet. The other thing that they do when they administer these traces is they sit down with the state officials with any questions or training or anything that they can do to help with our state colleagues to make their way through a complex traceability system. So some pretty encouraging things. And if you think back to that decade ago, when we were talking, those of us who talked about traceability, we were thinking that, golly, if you could trace an animal in 48 hours, that'd be the ticket, and we maybe could control FMD or something like that. Well, compare that 48 hours to what you see on this slide, with our states almost across the board doing these traces in literally minutes. So that gives us a lot of hope in being able to combat some of the disease threats that we have around the world. Now, I'll put this up. I'm not going to go through it, but I threw it up here just FYI. This is a flow chart. I didn't put a web address on it. I did a Google search for animal disease traceability plus APHIS. And this flow chart is on there. It helps to navigate through the requirements for traceability. So that is certainly helpful to me, and I think probably helpful to a lot of folks on the call to follow through. And then this is part of the same web page with the exemptions to that rule. Got a couple of slides here on some just gee whiz things that are kind of cool. I think I showed them to you once before, but this is an interactive map that is linked to each of the state offices to get a PIN if any producers or anybody needs a PIN. If you Google PIN plus APHIS, then it'll take you to this map, and you click on your state, and it will take you to the appropriate location to get that PIN. And then this one is another one. We approve, APHIS approves livestock markets with some different criteria, and we approve those markets. In the past, some of that approval was slow and cumbersome, and the poor guy that's out there with the market trying to have a sale might fill out the forms, and then it might have been literally months before they got an approval on it. So we built a web application that would allow that to all take place electronically. So when the APHIS inspector inspects the market for an approval, and the market owner requests for that agreement, they submit that electronically, and that will go to the state veterinarian and the area veterinarian in charge, and eventually to my desk. And that approval then oftentimes can take place in less than a day. Depends on whether everybody's at their computer or not. But that market approval process then has reduced that time for our folks out there from just an unacceptably long time to a few minutes. This particular map is a map of the markets that are available. So information about the approved livestock markets. And to find it, if you just do a Google search on approved livestock markets, you can pull that up. I want to talk a little bit about investments that we've put in tags and readers in the last few years, and talk a little bit about some of our funding and things that we have done. Our program implementation for our states, we put out, I think it's a little over $6 million now, but our states have funding, federal funding, to do a lot of different programs. The $6 million is just to implement the traceability part. It includes, starts out with a roadmap or a strategic plan of what they want to do. It helps to fund their trace exercises, their outreach. They can use it for data tags or readers or compliance, wherever they need to do that. And an interesting thing, and I don't have a number or a metric for it, but most of our states now are getting pretty good electronic tracing, and some of them are up to 70, 80, 90% of their tracing is of their movement documents are electronic now. Over the last few years, we've purchased tags each year in FY 20, 21, 22, and 23. We've had up to 8 million tags available each year. And the states, the first year were a little slow to order those. The last 2 years were quite a bit higher than that. And we also found some money to put some readers out there in some of the markets and in the hands of some of our accredited veterinarians to help support them in traceability. So this is the big question, and it's the question is where do we go and how do we support our stakeholders and our states? The first take home, I think, is that states have different needs. If you talk to any given state, they have different livestock industry, they have different market structures, they have different needs of what they want to do, they have different cattlemen's organizations to move forward. So the big question then is for us in APHIS, at least, is where do you put funding? I guess maybe the first question is where do you find funding? Which that's always a challenge because we do not have a specific congressional funding line for traceability. So assuming that we find funding in somewhere within our programs or budgets, how do we do that? How do we best support? Do we target the livestock markets and accredited veterinarians? Do we buy tags and readers, the data collectors, including software and software to do CVIs, hardware maybe, market software? Do we support data plans? That's a little challenging because that's usually a subscription. Do we focus funding on electronic ID for imported cattle or slaughter plants? I guess I'd comment on the imported cattle because in 1994, the World Trade Organization General Agreement for Trade and Tariffs, it's called the equivalency paragraph. And in that agreement between trading partners, you're only allowed to implement requirements on an importing country that are equivalent to what you do internally. So right now, we don't have a requirement for electronic ID in the United States. If we had that requirement for RFID, then that would open the door, not necessarily make it happen, but that would then, if the powers that be chose to do it, they could require that same requirement for imported animals as well. So 5 years, what do we have? Industry support, pending budget. Feeder cattle, this has been a question that's come up, and of whether feeder cattle should be included in a rule or not. Right now, I'm not sure that that's really even needed in the future. We've had some industry pushback on that particular part. I guess a couple things to be thinking about is that a lot, if not most, feeder cattle have some sort of RFID there. Majority of those feeders have more benefit from the UHF tags than the low frequency tags. And many of them, for their destination is slaughter, so they don't need official ID. So that one is a big question mark of whether that's even a necessary discussion going forward. I put it on here because this was came back to us from the Inspector General as something to for consideration. And then the next one is intrastate tracing. We've done a lot of things to support our states with funding, with the exercises, and with some of the infrastructure that are there. And that's the end of my presentation, Neville. I think we have time for questions now if you would like, or
yes,
or
fantastic.
if not, maybe it's time for that glass of wine somewhere.
Maybe both, right?
Yeah.
Let's do both. So fantastic. And honestly, you anticipated a lot of my questions that I had up front, and most especially the easiest one: what is the definition of a readable tag? Thank you for lining that out specifically, right? You know,
Sure.
that's a pretty vague kind of phrasing. So thank you for defining that. So I do want to ask you a couple of questions relative to the trace performance exercises, and kind of open the gamut up on that. So I'm assuming those animals, or when you do those trace exercises, that includes animals that already have electronic identification. Is that true or not true?
No, and I don't remember the proportion. It was about, it's varied by year. There's each year there's more and more that have electronic ID.
Yeah.
Those traces are from documents. So some of those are metal news tags. So roughly a third, I think, of them.
Okay.
Those tags are, if they're on a document, then they may be in a file box somewhere, which makes it difficult to find them. And
Yeah.
not this year, but last year, it was like the majority of traces that the states weren't able to complete were from those circumstances, from news tags or from paper records and that sort of thing. This year, I just talked to Dr. Reed a little bit ago, and she said that our states did not terminate any traces. They were able to complete every one that came to them. Those documents, I guess two things are really accounting for that, I think. One is the increased usage of the RFID tags, but the second one is the electronic record system. So if you think about your computer and you look up something on your computer, it's pretty quick and easy. If you have to go down the basement and find the right box that has the right papers in it, and then try to read somebody's writing that they wrote down a tag number, it's not quite as easy.
Yeah, yeah. Can you tell me just one more question kind of on that? Relative to cattle, are most of the traces done for TB? Would that be the majority of?
No, well, I would say an awful lot of them are from TBs, but the documentation that they pull those from are from health certificates, brucellosis tests, TB charts. I think, let's see, who's on here? I think I saw Dr. Davis. Jamie, are you on there? Can you?
Yeah.
Because you're the one who pulls those, works with states to get those. Can you answer that for Neville?
Dr. Dave's doing something else.
If you're talking, Jamie, you're on mute. Well, I'm pretty sure that's, I don't know where else they get the documents, but they are official documents.
Yeah.
And the health certificates, TB charts, brucellosis charts, those are some of the main ones.
Okay.
And I see that we have a question, Neville,
Yeah,
from
go ahead.
Nephi.
Yeah.
And
yeah, go ahead, Linda.
and Nephi had typed a question to everyone. And his question is, what is the status of the revised official qualification process for tags?
And Nephi, that's we can talk offline about that a little bit more, but that document will be published with the rule as soon as the rule comes out. So you should be able to see it within, like I said, the next few weeks or after the first of the year. We are proposing some changes to it. We are still trying to make sure that the qualification process gives us high quality tags. So not doing that, but we've reduced some of the requirements for the field trials to make those a little less onerous and allow you to get tags into the marketplace a little bit sooner than what they were before. I don't have the details for that right at hand, but we can sure talk about that later, or as soon as that publication comes out, you'll have the official document there to look at.
And Dr. Scott, a question that I had for you, and you might refer me to a document, but as far as prioritizing and distributing readers, how does that process work in a nutshell?
Well, two things. One is it may work differently coming up depending on what our funding looks like, because that one literally has been like shaking piggy banks. But the way that we've done that is provided the money that we had as an amendment to the state's annual operating cooperative agreement. And we had talked through a lot of different ways to do it, but we felt that the state veterinarians were best positions to figure out how to use those readers and where to put them and how to distribute them. So that would be at the discretion of the state veterinarian.
Great, thank you.
So we can open it up. Any other questions or comments? Feel free to jump in here. Dr. Scott, really, we should not call them, according to what you said too, right? We should not call them news tags. They're really bright tags with a new system. Is that right?
I don't know, Neville. You're asking the wrong guy. I've always called them news tags. I remember getting slapped down by Dr. Shear at one time, and he was absolutely right. They're not news tags because they're plastic news tags too. So maybe we say metal news tags because there aren't any other metal news tags, but don't know. The bright tags are the silver ones, the bangs tags are the orange ones. So
right.
So not exactly sure that there's an official appropriate name for them.
And yet we all know what we're referring to.
We know what we're talking about.
That is really the amazing meshing of culture and language, right? And this is a perfect example, right? If you didn't understand our business, you would have no idea what we mean. And this is this thing, but we all know what we're saying. So yeah, fascinating.
Do we have any other questions?
Let's see, I see.
Yeah.
Question for cattle, what is the percent of tags used for dairy and beef? I don't know, William. I know the dairy industry uses a lot more RFID tags. It's pretty standard. I know that the dairy industry has used probably increasingly the official tags, but certainly not all. So I really don't know that breakdown. I just don't know.
Anybody else? Well, Dr. Scott, I just want to say this was an outstanding review, and I'm so glad that we're going to have this available in archives. And it is just incredible to me how much misunderstanding there is still around ADT and tags and 840s and then manufacturer code numbers and what's needed where and who needs to do what, and we still have a lot of work to do in the industry in terms of education. So,
and it's also very valuable to have the update. My apologies.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you.
I do. There is another question.
Yeah, and you're all more than welcome. And I guess I would say if there's any questions or discussions, we're always open. We're just plain ordinary folks like you all, and we do have a traceability at USDA mailbox that we all watch over and try to respond to very quickly. We don't always have the answers, but certainly willing and happy to talk about them. Secondly, hope everybody put your comments in when this rule is published, so whatever they may be. We would appreciate that. And then Karen Jordan asks, if as a nation we want to really have a powerful trace system, is it time to have this funded as a line? And so Karen, I will answer that, not intending to be evasive, because as a federal employee, we cannot lobby for funding. we are given money to spend and do it the best that we can do to support our industry. That said, for these tags this last few years, it's been a real challenge to find the money to do it. We have each year we do our budget. The process usually is we put our budget in. We're told there's no money to fund it. We ask again, or we look some more, or someone up the chain says, well, yeah, maybe we need to find it for another year. Our budget people look where they can find a little bit of money. We have our the one line that most of our other traceability money comes out of, and so it becomes a real challenge to find that money. And as you can well imagine, with our mission, we have some real disease emergencies. Right now, it's kind of steady state with cattle as far as the things we have, like TB and brucellosis, but we have encroaching fever ticks and some other emerging things that are coming at us. We have huge outbreak in poultry right now with high path avian influenza that we're struggling with. And we have a continuing threat of African swine fever for our swine industry. And so the point of that is that our funding goes where we can best do our animal health mission. There's no congressional line. So if it comes down to an industry being destroyed or buying tags, then doing the best that we can do to protect any one of those industries is where our funding is going to go. So I guess that question I would throw back to you and other folks as far as how we as an industry want to proceed on that. From my office and my staff, we do believe that we would like to support traceability and tags and infrastructure in every way we can, given the money and the other priorities that we have for it. So hopefully, Karen, that wasn't too evasive of an answer, but I think that's the answer for you.
Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Neville. Thanks again, Dr. Scott. We always appreciate hearing from you. And this update was, as Neville had said, this update was certainly valuable, I think, for myself and everyone on the call. So we appreciate it. And we'll probably be reaching out to you sometime in the first quarter once the rule's released. And also, just for everyone on the call, we are having something a little different this time. Next week, I hope you will join us. Same time, 2 p.m. on Wednesday the 14th.
Same place.
Same bat time, same bat place. And we are going to share with our members kind of our vision for 2023 and our priorities. It will also be a time for you to provide feedback as well. So loved, absolutely, we're so thrilled about the participation today. And we might just have to bring Dr. Scott on every call that we have so we can get this draw. But but I hope you'll join me because you know, our committee is about supporting our members and the folks who attend here. So it's very important that we get as many people on next week's call because we want to be doing the right things to support you. So please mark your calendars. I hope you can make it. And if we don't have any other questions, I'll give it one last chance for questions, and then we will wrap up. You will get 4 minutes back of your time.
I just know that Dr. Scott is the next best thing relative to a Taylor Swift concert, right? Buying a ticket. So,
just don't use Ticketmaster, sell your
tickets.
Very good. Well, I thank you so much for everyone who attended. Thank you, Dr. Scott, again. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you all.
everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody. It's good,
Bye-bye.
good
You
seeing
had one
y'all.
more question in the chat box that just came in.
Let's see. How do we get the Packers engaged on this topic? Drive home the need. I guess maybe I would punt that one back to you, Neville. How do we get the Packers engaged?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? It's coming. They increasingly are focused on it, and we're seeing them invest in some possibilities, but it's sort of chicken and egg, right? It's really no different than a producer on the other side is who's going to invest in the infrastructure. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, as far as infrastructure, that's something certainly we could consider for funding for the Packers if that would be a motivation for them. I think they've got to get some business value out of it other than just
Correct.
having the
Absolutely right.
and stuff in
Yes.
there.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, John, for that question. And now I think without further ado, we will say goodbye and look forward to seeing everyone next week. Thanks again, folks.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.